Titus Howard is supposed to be the Texans' right tackle. And yet, the man consistently finds himself playing guard, despite that big extension he signed last year. An unfortunate season for him last year. Began the season injured, ended the season injured. He has updated his Twitter bio. All caps, right tackle only for the Houston Texans. He is reminding the Houston Texans what they need to do in free agency. Now, I'm not one of those people who's going to go to Pro Football Focus and say, these interior offensive linemen are good, these aren't. I don't want to draw the ire of George Fant, who got annoyed with an article like that. Pro Football Focus, I do not believe to be a very effective way to measure trench play. I just don't. I think Lance Zierlein knows what he's talking about when it comes to studying offensive linemen. I think very few other people actually know what they're talking about. Like Brian Baldinger might. But it's a very nuanced thing, I think, to study and know what a player is supposed to do and to know how a player should be better. So I'm not going to BS you and say that I know who's good and who's bad as far as free agent offensive linemen go. But if the Houston Texans go after anybody in free agency, more importantly than a defensive tackle, more importantly than a wide receiver, a safety, I do think interior offensive line help, a veteran, is maybe the most important thing that they need to do. They were hit by an unbelievable amount of bad luck when it comes to injuries on the offensive line last year. The odds are that won't happen again, but you just need depth on the interior because with Scott Quessenberry going down, with the uncertainty around Kenyon Green and everybody else who they threw into the mix in the interior, you can do better. So what I'm looking for, reasonably priced veterans who have played in a Shanahan-style offense. And the good news about that, because back in the day, it was actually tricky to find guys who could do the zone blocking that Mike Shanahan's offense wanted. Kyle Shanahan's dad. I'm talking about Kyle Shanahan now. God, I feel old saying that. It was very difficult to find guys who could fit that scheme for Gary Kubiak in a post-Mike Shanahan world. It is a lot easier to find guys who have played in a system familiar with that these days. So there should be options, which means that they maybe won't have to spend that much money. But I'm not going to tell you whether or not the signing's good or bad. I'm just going to say I hope that they bring in somebody at that position that has played in the Shanahan system before. There's something that the Houston Texans are supposedly doing in free agency that I'm not thrilled about. This is a report from Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, ESPN.com. Fowler writes this: if the Texans are one player away on offense, maybe they should make it an exciting tailback option, such as Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry. There's buzz league-wide that Houston could try to improve at running back to help second-year quarterback C.J. Stroud. Most of a quality starting offensive line is under contract for multiple years. Several key players are pending free agents, including pass rusher Jonathan Grenard, tight end Dalton Schultz, corner Steven Nelson, defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, and linebacker Blake Cashman. Houston likely can't keep all four, but should prioritize a few. If Grenard leaves, Houston needs to backfill an edge rusher who has upside opposite Will Anderson Jr. So these are all of the many things that the Houston Texans could potentially do. I want to focus on one thing, the first two sentences in this report. If Houston is one player away on offense, again, wrote Fowler, make it an exciting tailback option such as Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry. There's buzz league-wide that Houston could try to improve at running back to help second-year quarterback C.J. Stroud. So here's where I get a little bit concerned. It is clear to me that the offense that the Houston Texans run is not compatible with every single running back. It's not. Dameon Pierce was really good in 2022. He sucked in that offense last year. Is that Pierce's fault? Is it the interior offensive line's fault? I don't know. I think Pierce is more talented than Devin Singletary. Singletary, by the way, also a free agent, did pretty well in certain games for the Houston Texans as their lead running back. But there were other games where he didn't do all that much. I think Singletary's a good player. I think Singletary's a good guy to have as your second running back. Am I going to go so far, though, in saying that, okay, Pierce isn't a scheme fit, Singletary's probably better as a number 2 running back, that the Texans should sign a Saquon Barkley or a Derrick Henry? I'm not going that far. I'm just not. You're going to have to spend money that could be spent on the defensive side of things, that could be spent on the interior offensive line if you sign a running back. And I don't like that I now am one of the people that believes that running backs are findable. I won't say that running backs don't matter like a lot of the analytics folks will. I think there are some guys who are truly difference makers, but they get hurt, and you often find yourself having to replace them. Is a running back like a Saquon Barkley or a Derrick Henry, Barkley, a guy who's been injured a couple of times, Henry, a guy who is getting up there in age, who takes a lot of time to get moving forward. Are those two guys going to be the difference for the Texans team that we saw this past year? It would help if they could run the football more effectively, but I just don't know that the issues with the offensive line had to do with the running backs on the Texans. Maybe in the case of Pierce, yes, as much as it had to do with interior offensive line that wasn't good. And to go back to what we talked about a little bit earlier when talking about the Texans in free agency, you saw Titus Howard change his Twitter profile to read right tackle only. If he is a right tackle only and the Texans are looking at that, interior offensive line is what they should be addressing. And signing a running back to a short-term deal is not going to give you a whole lot of flexibility to sign someone that could be an impact player there, to potentially sign an impact defensive player that is not on the Texans already, and to re-sign Jonathan Grenard. It just makes it a little bit more difficult. So there you go. But it sounds like, from the sound of things, as I said that twice, that was a little repetitive, that the Texans are at the very least thinking about signing a running back to help out CJ Stroud.